I've created 7 categories to find the best plays for Week 8 fantasy football. They're boom bust, best matchup, must sit, sleeper, the top rookie of the week winner, and the Hail Mary play of the week. We'll identify a player from each category to help us make those critical lineup decisions. Let's kick things off with the boom bust play for Week 8. This is a player with a huge upside, but a low floor. Think high risk, high reward. And I'm rolling the dice with the hope that he explodes. I'm going to go with Odunze for the boom bust category here in Week 8. It's been a quiet couple of weeks for Odunze, who got off to a hot start. He started the season with 4 straight top 20 performances, including a wide receiver 4 finish in Week 2. However, over the last 2 weeks, he has combined for just 10.3 fantasy points. The target shares, routes, air yards, everything has remained about the same, though, which means Odunze should get back to producing as a startable fantasy asset in no time. That likely will begin here in Week 8. That's because he gets a matchup with a Ravens defense that's allowed the second most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. This game has the second highest projected total of the week at 49.5. Lamar Jackson is trending towards returning, and the Bears are 6.5-point underdogs on the road in Baltimore. They're not going to be able to lean on that run game like they have over the last 2 weeks. Caleb Williams is going to have to sling it, which means we're looking at a blow-up spot for his best wide receiver, Odunze. I also like for the boom bust category this week, George Kittle. It's National Tight Ends Day this week. You have to play George Kittle. He's going to blow up. I guarantee it. Tough matchup, but I think he can go boom. And I really like Mason Taylor this week at the Bengals. More on him later, though. Let's move on to the best matchup for Week 8. Plain and simple, this guy has the nuts matchup. Start him if you got him. And I'm looking at Bo Nix at home against the Cowboys. Bo Nix did it for a quarter in Week 7. Let's see if he can do it for 4 in Week 8. The Cowboys have been brutal on the defensive side of the ball this season. They've allowed the most passing yards, the most passing touchdowns, the most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position this season. Heck, they've even allowed the most rushing yards by quarterbacks this season. And Bo Nix does it all. He's 4th in pass attempts per game, top 10 among quarterbacks in rush attempts and rushing yards. And not only is the matchup with the Cowboys defense extremely favorable, but the Cowboys offense has been one of the best in the league this season, which means Bo Nix and the Broncos are going to have to throw a bunch to keep up with them. In case in point, this game has the highest projected total of the week at 50.5. So Bo Nix, heck, all of your Broncos are must starts in Week 8. I also like the matchups this week for Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard against the Bills. Cortland Sutton, Bo Nix's top wide receiver against the Cowboys. Chris Olave against the Bucks. Caleb Williams against the Ravens, along with Odunze, who we already talked about. Heck, I even like the running game this week for the Bears. Play DeAndre Swift if you got him. J.K. Dobbins in that Broncos-Cowboys game as well. Moving on to the must-sit player for Week 8. This is a player with a terrible matchup. Needs to be on your bench if you have other options. I'm sitting Jacory, Croskey-Merritt, Bill at the Chiefs this week. Jacory Croskey-Merritt has been a fun sleeper this year. I'll give you that. He's made some plays. He's explosive, but he has his limitations. And one of those limitations is as a pass catcher. It was one of his knocks coming into the league, and it's continued into the first half of his rookie season in the NFL as well. But Jacory Croskey-Merritt, he has just 7 receptions on the season. He hasn't been targeted more than twice in any game, and that makes him pretty game script dependent. We saw that last week. He played just 50% of the snaps in that loss to the Cowboys. Jeremy McNichols, the passing downs back there in Washington, he played 36% of the snaps. And that led to just 32 total yards and 4.2 fantasy points as the Commanders abandoned the run game for Jacory Croskey-Merritt. And now he gets the Chiefs in week 8 with Marcus Mariota at quarterback, by the way, not Jaden Daniels. The Washington defense are really struggling right now. The Chiefs offense is humming. And the Chiefs are an insane 12.5-point favorites at home. They're probably getting out to a big lead in this one. So JCM, he's likely going to get phased out as the Commanders shift into comeback mode once again. And on top of that, the Chiefs have allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs this season. So just keep Bill on your bench if you can. You got to play the matchups with him week to week, and this ain't the week. This also ain't the week for Jalen Waddle against the Falcons. That defense, very quietly, that defense has been dominating in the passing game. Trevion Henderson, we're done with him. Until they get him on the field, until he actually shows he deserves to be on the field, we are done with Trevion Henderson, especially against a really tough Browns defense. And on the other side in that same game, I'm sitting Quinshon Judkins. I know he had the big blow-up spot last week. We talked about that on this video last week. We predicted that was going to happen. It did. This week, game script not going to be in his favor. Matchup not in his favor. I am sitting Quinshon Judkins if I can. I also don't want to play Juwan Jennings against the Texans. They've been a really, really tough matchup this year. And I don't want to touch Terry McLaurin either. He's going to have a backup quarterback. He might not even play. We're not even 100% sure that he's going to play. It sounds like he's going to, but he's coming off what's been like a mysterious injury. I want to keep Terry McLaurin on my bench. Tough matchup. Backup quarterback. Just doesn't feel right to play him this week. Let's move on to the top sleeper play for week 8. This is a player flying under the radar. Not many people are starting him, but the stars are aligned for him to be a really good play this week. I'm looking at Evan Engram against the Cowboys. It was a slow start for Evan Engram, but he's been targeted at least 6 times in 4 straight games with 10 receptions and 84 yards over the last 2 weeks. His route participation is still only in the 60% range every week, but he's top 3 among tight ends and targets per route. So at least he's getting the opportunities when he's out there. And 60% isn't horrible. That's about the same as what we get from Dalton Kincaid every week, just for reference. But we know how bad that Cowboys defense has been this season. We talked about it when we talked about Bo Nix. They've allowed the most passing yards and the most passing touchdowns this season. And while they haven't exactly faced a gauntlet of tight ends, they've still allowed the 6th most receptions and the 12th most receiving yards to the tight end position. Their offense, on the other hand, has been one of the best in the league, which means the Broncos are going to have to throw a bunch to keep up in this game. This game has shootout written all over it. It's the highest projected total of the week at 50.5. It's National Tight Ends Day this week. To celebrate, I'll be plugging Evan Engram into my lineups with confidence. I'm also playing RJ Harvey as a deep sleeper this week against the Cowboys. He gets really mixed into the passing game sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes it's Tyler Bidet. That's a risk. That's why he's a sleeper. If RJ Harvey, he can make a few big plays in the run game, in the pass game against that Cowboys defense. If you need a deep sleeper, you could play RJ Harvey this week. I also like Marvin Mims. That's going to be a theme. Play your Broncos this week, man. I like Tez Johnson against the Saints. Cade Otton against the Saints. We saw what Cade Otton did last year when Chris Godwin was out, when Mike Evans was out. I know they didn't have Emeka Egbuka, which they do this year, but I do think Cade Otton can be productive in that offense. I like Xavier Hutchinson as a deep sleeper this week. If Nico Collins sits out, same thing with Jalen Noel. One of those 2 guys is going to be productive. Isaiah Davis against the Bengals. Kyle Pitts against the Dolphins. Kyle Monangai kind of could be dependent on if Lamar Jackson plays or not. Alec Iamaner as well against the Colts. And if you want more sleepers, I do a sleepers show live right here on the Yards Per Fantasy YouTube channel every Saturday night with my co-host Sam. We give you 6 sleepers who you can start, plus a bold prediction to cap off the show. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss that. Let's move on to my favorite rookie play for week 8. This is a rookie I expect to outperform expectations. I'm looking at Mason Taylor against the Bengals. And speaking of that sleeper show, I brought Mason Taylor to the table as one of my sleepers in week 5. Of course, he blew up in that game with 17.7 fantasy points, catching 9 balls on 12 targets. A little pat on the back for Alex. But he's been quiet in the 2 games since then. However, he is getting a ton of snaps. He's running all the routes. It's just the quarterback play has been horrible in that offense. But now the Jets are turning to Tyrod Taylor, who should at least bring some normalcy to that passing game. I'm not saying he's going to light it up by any means, but at least he's capable of completing a forward pass. And he'll get to do it against a pretty vulnerable Bengals defense. The Bengals have allowed the 3rd most passing yards of any defense this season, and they're tied with the Cowboys for the most passing touchdowns allowed. And specifically against tight ends, they've allowed the 2nd most receptions, the most receiving yards, the most receiving touchdowns, and the most fantasy points per game. And these really aren't even close to the next team on the list for any of these categories. And with Joe Flacco now at quarterback for the Bengals, the Jets are going to have a real offense on the other side to try to keep up with. They're 6.5-point underdogs on the road. So at some point, they're going to have to ask Tyrod Taylor to sling it. That can only play in favor of a guy like Mason Taylor, especially with no Garrett Wilson or any other competent wide receivers in that offense. So again, on National Tight Ends Day, play your boy Mason Taylor. I'm also looking at rookies this week. Jaden Higgins. We talked about how Nico Collins could be out. I mentioned Xavier Hutchinson as possible play there, but Jaden Higgins seems like the obvious guy, as does Jalen Noel in that offense. 2 rookies. One of them is going to have a productive day. I also like Matthew Golden against the Steelers. The Steelers defense has been under the radar, susceptible to big plays from wide receivers. Then we also mentioned Alec Eymanner against Colts. Moving on to the week winner. This is the guy who's going to absolutely smash this week, put your team on his back, lead you to a victory pretty much all by himself. And I'm looking at Bijan Robinson against the Dolphins. Groundbreaking stuff, I know, but this is the category where we kind of pause, have a little bit of fun. And we've seen how bad the Dolphins defense has been this season, especially against running backs. Only the Bengals and Ravens have allowed more fantasy points per game to the running back position, and no one has allowed more rushing yards. I mean, we saw Rico Dowdle run for 200 yards against the Dolphins. Kamani Vidal ran for 124 yards, and Quinshon Judkins just scored 3 rushing touchdowns against the Dolphins in Week 7. Imagine what Bijan is about to do. The Falcons are at home, 7.5-point favorites with a banged-up quarterback. They're going to lean on Bijan in both the run game and as a receiver. If you don't have Bijan on your team, just pray that you don't have to go up against him this week. That's all I'm going to say about that. Other potential week winners this week, Jonathan Taylor against the Titans, and Bo Nix, who we already talked about, against the Cowboys. He's in for a big week. Let's cap things off with the Hail Mary play of the week. This is a player who is rostered in less than 5% of Yahoo leagues, but it can be started if you need a desperation play. I'm looking at Isaiah Davis against the Bengals. The Braylon Allen injury a few weeks ago moved Isaiah Davis to RB2 on the Jets depth chart. And the Jets seem reluctant to give Breece Hall a true bell cow workload, which means there's a little bit of room for his RB2 to get some work. And Isaiah Davis has now reached a 40% snap share in 2 of 3 games since Braylon Allen's injury, including 48% in Week 7. Now, that hasn't really translated to fantasy production just yet, but he's running a bunch of routes, averaging about a 55% route participation over the last 3 weeks. And he's had 2 games with 4 targets over those same 3 games, including a 12% target share in Week 7. And now we expect the passing volume and the efficiency to go up with Tyrod Taylor taking over at quarterback. And in his 1 start earlier this season, Tyrod Taylor targeted the running back position on 8 of his 36 pass attempts. That's a 22.2% target share. I know Isaiah Davis has been mostly buried on the depth chart early on in his career, but he did have 1 game last season where where he was targeted 6 times, racked up 67 yards, scored a touchdown, and was a top 15 running back in fantasy football. Now we've got Breece Hall coming out of week 7 a little bit banged up. He started the week limited in practice. So there's a real chance we get an increased role for Isaiah Davis this weekend in what should be an improved offense under Tyrod Taylor. Oh, and did I mention they get the Bengals in week 8? That's a Bengals defense that has allowed the second most rushing yards to running backs, 8th most rushing touchdowns by running backs, 6th most receptions by running backs, 4th most receiving yards by running backs, the most receiving touchdowns by running backs, and the most fantasy points per game to the running back position this season. So if you're in a desperate spot, I know it's By-Mageddon after all, and you need a fill-in off your waiver wire, throw a dart in Isaiah Davis's direction. He's rostered in just 4% of Yahoo leagues. Other Hail Mary plays for week 8, Shamir DK of the Titans going against the Colts. He had a big touchdown last week. Noah Fant against the Jets. Josh Reynolds against the Bengals. And Jalen Noel, who we already mentioned earlier as a sleeper, against the 49ers. That's it. Those are our 7 categories. We mentioned more than 30 players in this video. I hope something from this video will help you get that W in week 8. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll be putting out content like this all season long. And if you want more from me, you can find my rankings, articles, resources, and tools at yardsperfantasy.com. Make sure you check back here for that sleeper show on Saturday night.